The blizzard hit without warning on the 16th of January in 1873, turning the Montana Territory landscape into a white tomb that threatened to swallow Victoria Shepherd whole as she stumbled through knee-deep snow. Her fingers so numb she could no longer feel the reins of the horse she'd lost an hour ago. Victoria had been traveling from Fort Benton to her uncle's ranch outside of Helena when the storm descended like divine punishment. She'd been foolish to travel alone, but after her father's death 3 months prior and her mother's passing the year before that, she had nowhere else to turn. Her uncle had written, offering her a place to stay and work in exchange for helping his wife with their children and the household. At 22 years old, Victoria had little choice. The small boarding house she'd been managing in Fort Benton had been sold to pay her father's debts, leaving her with nothing but a single trunk of belongings and a heart growing colder than the winter wind. The cold was stealing everything from her now. Her hope, her strength, her will to keep moving. She'd lost sight of the trail hours ago, and the sun had vanished behind thick clouds that dumped endless snow upon the frozen earth. Her dark traveling dress, appropriate for a stage-coach journey, was wholly inadequate for trudging through a Montana blizzard. Ice clung to her skirts, weighing her down with each step. Her bonnet had blown away, and her dark hair was thick with snow and ice. Victoria's faith had been wavering long before the cold tried to kill her. She'd prayed when her mother fell ill. She'd begged God when her father started drinking himself into an early grave. She'd pleaded for some sign, some mercy, some indication that she mattered in this vast, uncaring world. The only answer had been silence, followed by more loss. Now, as her body began to shut down from exposure, as her legs refused to carry her another step, she wondered if this was her answer. Perhaps she'd been meant to disappear into the white emptiness, another forgotten soul the frontier had claimed. She collapsed into a snowdrift, too exhausted to rise. Her eyes fluttered closed. The cold didn't hurt anymore, which some distant part of her mind recognized as dangerous. She thought of her mother's smile, her father before the drink took him, warm summer days that seemed like dreams from another lifetime. She thought of all the things she'd never experienced, never know. Love, a home of her own, children, purpose. The darkness crept in at the edges of her vision, welcoming and terrifying all at once. Then she heard it. A sound cutting through the howl of wind. A voice, rough and commanding, shouting words she couldn't quite understand. Strong hands gripped her shoulders, lifting her from the snow. She tried to open her eyes but managed only slits, catching a glimpse of a frost-covered face, intense blue eyes and a dark hat pulled low. "Stay with me," the voice demanded. "Don't you dare give up." She wanted to tell him she already had, but her lips wouldn't form words. Instead, she felt herself being lifted, cradled against warmth she'd forgotten existed. The movement jostled her, and she moaned softly in protest. I know, just hold on, we're not far." The world became fragments after that, the smell of horse and leather, the sensation of movement. More cold, then suddenly, blessedly, the absence of wind. Shelter, the creak of a door. Warmth that felt like fire against her frozen skin, painful in its intensity. She cried out as feeling began returning to her limbs in agonizing waves. "I've got you," that voice said again, closer now, gentler but no less firm. "The pain means you're alive. That's good, stay with me." She felt layers being removed, her ice-encrusted cloak, her frozen gloves that had long since stopped providing any protection. Blankets wrapped around her, heavy and warm. Something hot pressed against her lips. "Drink," the voice commanded. She managed a small sip of what tasted like tea, heavily sweetened and mixed with something stronger. The liquid burned down her throat, but it was a good burn, a living burn. She coughed, and more of the drink was offered. This time she took a longer swallow. Good girl, that's it. Just keep drinking. Her eyes finally managed to focus. The cabin was small, a single room with a stone fireplace that blazed with blessed heat. Supplies lined rough wooden shelves, and a narrow bed occupied one corner. She was on the floor near the fire, wrapped in what must have been every blanket the place contained. Kneeling beside her was a man who looked to be in his late 20s, with dark blonde hair dampened by melted snow, those striking blue eyes she'd glimpsed before, and several days' worth of stubble covering a strong jaw. He wore wool pants and a heavy shirt, his coat hanging by the door, still dripping melting snow onto the wooden planks. "Where?" she managed to whisper, her voice raw. "Line cabin," he said. "About 15 miles south of Helena. I use it when I'm checking the fences and stock in winter. Lucky I decided to ride out today, though this storm nearly killed me too." He studied her face with an intensity that would have made her uncomfortable under normal circumstances. "What in God's name were you doing out there alone, traveling?" she said. "To Helena, my uncle. I lost my horse." He shook his head, something like anger flashing in his eyes. No stage driver worth his salt would have continued in this weather. They would have stopped, waited it out. "The stage broke an axle yesterday, outside of Fort Benton. I hired a horse." The words came slowly, her mind still foggy. "Thought I could make it before the storm hit." "Christ," he muttered, then seemed to catch himself. "Pardon my language, but that was foolish." "I know," she said, and to her horror, tears began streaming down her face. She couldn't stop them. The fear, the cold, the sheer terror of how close she'd come to dying overwhelmed her exhausted defenses. "I know it was foolish. Everything I've done has been foolish. I should have stayed in Fort Benton. I should have found work there somehow. I should have—" A sob cut off her words. The man's expression softened immediately. He reached out, then hesitated, his hand hovering uncertainly before gently touching her shoulder through the blankets. "Hey now, don't do that. You're safe. You're alive. That's what matters." "I have nothing," she whispered. "My trunk, my clothes, what little money I had, it was all on that horse. I have nothing and no way to reach my uncle. He doesn't even know I'm coming. I wrote him, but I don't know if he received the letter. I'm supposed to arrive in Helena, but I don't even know where I am or how I'll get there. I can't pay you for your trouble. I can't stop," he said firmly but not unkindly. "First things first. You need to warm up completely, get some food in you, and rest. We'll figure out everything else after that. My name is Fletcher Shepherd, and you are—" "Victoria Shepherd," she said automatically, then caught herself. "No relation, obviously." The corner of his mouth twitched in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Obviously, though it's a fine name to share." He stood, moving to the small stove near the fireplace. "Think you can eat something? I've got beans and some salt pork. Not fancy, but it's hot and it'll help." Victoria nodded, suddenly aware of the gnawing hunger in her stomach. She couldn't remember when she'd last eaten. Yesterday morning, perhaps, before she'd set out from where the stage had broken down. Fletcher worked efficiently, heating the food and pouring more of the tea. As he moved about the cabin, Victoria noticed the way he favored his right leg slightly, barely perceptible but present nonetheless. He was tall, well built in the way of men who worked with their hands and bodies. There was something solid about him, something that spoke of competence and strength. "How did you find me?" she asked as he handed her a tin plate of food. Her hands shook as she took it, still not fully functional, and he steadied the plate with his own hands until she had a firm grip. "Luck," he said. "Or providence, depending on what you believe. I was heading back here when the storm hit. Saw something dark against the snow, went to investigate. Thought you were a fallen deer at first." He settled onto a stool, his own plate in hand. You were half buried already. Another 10 minutes and I never would have seen you." Victoria stared at the food, her throat tight. "Thank you. I know those words aren't adequate, but thank you for saving my life." "Don't mention it," Fletcher said. "Couldn't very well leave you there. No decent person could." They ate in silence for a few minutes, the only sounds the crackling of the fire and the howl of wind outside. The storm showed no signs of abating. Victoria's body slowly came back to life, pins and needles dancing across her skin as her core temperature rose. Her toes and fingers ached terribly, but Fletcher had checked them and assured her there was no frostbite, just the pain of warming frozen tissue. "This uncle of yours," Fletcher said eventually. "What's his name? I know most of the ranchers around Helena." "Thomas Shepherd," Victoria said. "He has a ranch somewhere outside of town. I've never been there. We exchanged letters after my father died." Fletcher's brow furrowed in thought. "Thomas Shepherd. Can't say I know that name, but there are always new folks settling. How long has he been there?" "I'm not certain. A few years, I think." "We'll find him," Fletcher said with a confidence Victoria wished she could share. "Once this storm clears, I'll take you into Helena. Someone will know where to find him." "I can't ask you to do that," Victoria protested. "You've already done so much. You're not asking, I'm offering." His blue eyes met hers steadily. "Besides, I can't very well leave you stranded in a line cabin with no supplies and no way to get anywhere." "What kind of man would that make me?" "A practical one," Victoria said quietly. "I told you I can't pay you." "I don't recall asking for payment," Fletcher replied. There was no judgment in his voice, just simple fact. "Eat your food, Miss Shepherd. You need your strength." Victoria obeyed, too tired and overwhelmed to argue further. The food was plain but good, and she felt strength returning with each bite. As she ate, she studied Fletcher covertly. He had kind eyes, she decided. Direct and honest. There was a steadiness to him that she found deeply reassuring after the chaos and loss of the past months. He wasn't handsome in a conventional sense, his features too rough-hewn for that, but there was something appealing about his face nonetheless. It was a face you could trust, she thought. A face that wouldn't lie to you even when the truth was hard. When they'd finished eating, Fletcher took the plates and cleaned them with efficiency. "You should sleep," he said. "Take the bed. I'll be fine by the fire." "I can't take your bed," Victoria protested. "You can and you will," Fletcher said firmly. "Don't argue with me on this, Miss Shepherd. You've been through hell today. You need proper rest." Victoria wanted to argue further, but exhaustion crashed over her like a wave. She nodded, letting Fletcher help her to her feet. Her legs were unsteady, and he kept a supporting hand under her elbow until she reached the narrow bed. She sank onto it gratefully, still wrapped in the blankets. "Thank you," she whispered. "Rest," was all he said in response. Victoria closed her eyes, certain she'd fall asleep immediately, but her mind wouldn't quiet. The events of the day played through her thoughts on an endless loop. The cold, the fear, the certainty that she was going to die alone in the snow. The complete loss of faith that had settled over her in what she'd thought were her final moments. She'd given up. She'd actually given up, stopped fighting, accepted death. But death hadn't come. Instead, Fletcher had found her, saved her, brought her back from the edge. "Fletcher," she said softly into the dimness of the cabin. His response came from near the fireplace. "You believe in God?" There was a long pause. "That's a heavy question for a night like this." "I just wondered," Victoria said. "I used to believe. I'm not sure I do anymore." "What changed?" Fletcher asked quietly. "Everything," Victoria said. "My mother died. My father drank himself into the grave. I lost everything I had. I prayed and prayed and nothing changed. Nothing got better. Today, in the snow, I couldn't even muster the strength to pray anymore. I'd run out of faith." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was thoughtful. I don't know much about God or prayer or any of that, but I know sometimes things get dark, so dark you can't see any light anywhere, and in those moments it's easy to think there's nothing worth believing in. So you don't believe, Victoria said, not quite a question. I didn't say that, Fletcher replied. I think maybe faith isn't about praying for things to get better. Maybe it's about holding on even when they don't. About putting one foot in front of the other even when you can't see where you're going. You did that today, Miss Shepherd. You kept walking even when you must have wanted to stop. That takes a kind of faith. But I did stop, Victoria whispered. At the end, I gave up. And yet you're alive, Fletcher said gently. Maybe that means something. Maybe there's still a reason for you to be here. Victoria felt tears prickling at her eyes again. I want to believe that. I'm just so tired of losing things, losing people, losing hope. I know the feeling, Fletcher said, and something in his voice suggested he truly did. But here's what I've learned. Long as you're breathing, there's a chance for things to get better. Long as your heart's beating, there's something to hold on to. And what do I hold on to? Victoria asked. I have nothing left. You have yourself, Fletcher said. That's more than nothing. And tomorrow, when this storm clears, you'll have a path forward. Maybe not the one you planned, but a path nonetheless. Sometimes that's all we get. Sometimes that's enough. Victoria absorbed his words, turning them over in her mind. There was wisdom there, hard-earned and honest. How do you know these things? Experience, Fletcher said. The hard kind. Now sleep, Miss Shepherd. Things always look better in daylight. This time Victoria did sleep, dropping into unconsciousness like a stone into deep water. Her dreams were fragmented and strange, full of snow and darkness, and a voice calling her back from the void. She woke to dim morning light filtering through the cabin's single window. The storm had lessened but not stopped entirely. Snow still fell, though the wind had died down to occasional gusts instead of the constant shriek of the night before. The fire still burned, carefully tended, and Fletcher sat near it, mending something that looked like a saddle strap. He looked up when she stirred. Morning, how do you feel? Victoria took mental inventory of her body, sore, stiff, but alive. Her fingers and toes still ached, but the pain was manageable. Better, she said. Much better. Good. There's coffee if you want it, and I can heat up some more food. Coffee sounds wonderful, Victoria admitted, sitting up carefully. She was still wearing her dress, wrinkled and damp but drying. Her hair must look like a rat's nest. Fletcher poured coffee into a tin cup and brought it to her. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and Victoria felt a spark of something she couldn't quite name. Awareness, perhaps. He had saved her life. That created a connection whether she wanted it or not. Storm should clear by tomorrow, Fletcher said, returning to his seat. Ground will be hell to travel on, but we'll manage. It's about a 4-hour ride to Helena in good conditions. Might take 6 or 7 with the snow. You really mean to take me, Victoria said. It wasn't quite a question. I really mean to, Fletcher confirmed. I've got business in Helena anyway. Need to pick up supplies and check on a few things. You're not putting me out. Can I ask you something? Victoria said. Shoot. Why do you do this? Live out here, I mean. It seems lonely. Fletcher was quiet for a moment, his hands still on the leather he'd been working. It is lonely sometimes, he admitted. But it's honest work. I prefer it to town life. Too many people, too much noise, too much pretending to be things you're not. He glanced at her. I work for a ranch, the Circle T. Owner's name is James Thornton. Good man, fair employer. I oversee his winter range, make sure the cattle that shelter in the high valleys are doing all right, keep the fences mended, watch for predators and rustlers. It's simple work, but it matters. You like being alone, Victoria observed. I like being useful, Fletcher corrected gently. There's a difference. I don't mind solitude, but I don't seek it out for its own sake. It's just part of the job." He paused. "What about you? What did you do in Fort Benton?" "I managed a boarding house," Victoria said. "After my mother died, my father bought it, thinking the work would keep him occupied. It did for a while, but then he started drinking more and working less. I ended up running it myself." The boarders were mostly miners and freighters, rough men but generally decent. I cooked and cleaned and kept the books. It was hard work, but I didn't mind. It kept me busy. "You must have been young when you started," Fletcher said. 19, Victoria confirmed. "It's been 3 years." Or it was 3 years. The boarding house is gone now, sold to pay my father's debts to the saloons. She heard the bitterness in her own voice and tried to temper it. "I'm sorry, that's not your burden." "Sounds like you've been carrying a lot of burdens on your own," Fletcher observed. "That's a heavy load for anyone, let alone someone your age." "What choice did I have?" Victoria asked. "My father was all I had left. I couldn't just abandon him." "No," Fletcher agreed quietly. "I don't suppose you could have. That speaks well of you, Miss Shepherd. A lot of people would have cut their losses and run." "Sometimes I wish I had," Victoria admitted. "Is that terrible?" "It's honest," Fletcher said. "There's nothing terrible about honesty." They fell into comfortable silence after that. Fletcher finished his mending while Victoria drank her coffee and stared into the fire. She found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, noting the way his hands moved with practiced skill, the patience evident in how he worked. There was something deeply calming about watching competent hands perform familiar tasks. "Can I help with anything?" she asked eventually, feeling useless just sitting. Fletcher looked up, considering. "Can you cook?" "Yes," Victoria said. "I fed 20 boarders 3 meals a day. I can cook." "Then you can take over meal preparation if you want," Fletcher said. "Supplies are on those shelves. It's mostly beans, rice, salt pork, flour, and coffee, but there's some dried vegetables and a little sugar if you're creative." Victoria stood, grateful to have something to do. Her legs were steadier today, the strength returning to her body. She explored the shelves, taking inventory of what was available. It wasn't much, but she'd worked with less. Within an hour she had beans soaking, bread dough rising near the fire, and plans for something that would at least approximate a decent stew for their dinner. Fletcher watched her work with apparent approval. "You weren't lying about being able to cook." "I don't lie," Victoria said, then paused. "Actually, that's not entirely true. I lied to my father about how much money the boarding house was making. I told him we were barely breaking even when actually we were doing quite well. I hid the profits in a tin can under my bed. I thought if he knew we had money, he'd drink it all away." Her hands stilled on the dough she'd been kneading. "He found it anyway 3 months before he died, spent every cent in 2 weeks. That must have hurt," Fletcher said quietly. "It did," Victoria admitted, "but I was angrier at myself than at him. I should have hidden it better. I should have planned better. I should have." She stopped, realizing she was kneading the dough too aggressively. "Sorry, I don't know why I'm telling you all this." "Sometimes it's easier to talk to strangers," Fletcher said. "No history, no judgment, just listening. Do you have anyone?" Victoria asked. "Family, I mean." "Not anymore," Fletcher said. "My mother died when I was 12. My father was a cavalry officer killed by Cheyenne raiders when I was 15. No siblings. I've been on my own since then." "I'm sorry," Victoria said sincerely. "That's very young to be alone." "I managed," Fletcher said. "Worked ranches, learned the trade, found I was good at it. Mr. Thornton hired me 5 years ago, and I've been with the Circle T since. It's the closest thing to a home I've had in a long time." "You were 17 when your father died," Victoria said. "You've been working ranches for 10 years. Going on 11, Fletcher confirmed. "I'm 28 before you ask. And yes, it's been a long time since I've had family or even friends, really. Ranching isn't a social profession, especially not the kind of ranching I do. Victoria shaped the dough into rounds and set them aside to rise further. Do you ever get lonely? Sometimes, Fletcher admitted, but I've learned to live with it. You? Yes, Victoria said simply, especially after my mother died. My father wasn't really present, even when he was physically there. The boarders were company but not companionship, if that makes sense. I had acquaintances but no real friends, no one I could talk to about real things. And yet you're talking to me, Fletcher pointed out. You saved my life, Victoria said. That creates a kind of trust, I suppose. Or maybe I'm just so tired of keeping everything locked inside. Maybe I needed someone to hear me, even if it's a stranger I'll never see again after you take me to Helena. Something flickered across Fletcher's face, an expression Victoria couldn't quite read. Maybe, was all he said. The day passed slowly, marked by simple tasks and occasional conversation. The storm continued its gradual diminishment, the snow tapering to flurries by late afternoon. Victoria cooked. Fletcher did chores around the cabin, and they existed in a strange bubble of enforced intimacy. Two strangers trapped together by circumstance and weather. As evening fell and they shared the meal Victoria had prepared, Fletcher said, "This is good. Really good." Those boarders of yours didn't know how lucky they were. Victoria felt a flush of pleasure at the compliment. Thank you. I tried to give them food worth eating. Most of them worked hard and deserved a decent meal at the end of the day. You cared about them, Fletcher observed. I suppose I did, Victoria admitted. They were people doing difficult work far from home. The least I could do was feed them well and keep the rooms clean. Small kindnesses matter. They do, Fletcher agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, I've been thinking about what you said last night, about losing faith. Victoria looked at him, waiting. The cold takes a lot from people, Fletcher continued. Not just physical warmth, but hope, determination, the will to keep fighting. It's insidious that way. It creeps into your bones and your mind and tells you that giving up is easier than going on, that death would be a relief. Yes, Victoria whispered. That's exactly how it felt. But you're still here, Fletcher said, his blue eyes intense on hers. You survived. And I know you think that was just luck, just chance, just me happening to be in the right place at the right time. But maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's a sign that you're not done yet, that there are still things for you to do, experiences to have, reasons to be here. I want to believe that, Victoria said. But everything I had planned, everything I thought my life would be, it's gone. My parents are dead. The boarding house is sold. I'm traveling to impose on an uncle I barely know in hopes he'll take pity on me and give me work. That's not a life. That's survival. Survival is where life starts, Fletcher said. You can't build anything if you're dead. Right now you're in survival mode, and that's all right, that's necessary. But survival can turn into living if you let it, if you have faith that it can. Faith in what? Victoria asked, unable to keep the despair from her voice. Faith in God. God let my parents die. God let me lose everything. God let me nearly freeze to death in a snowbank. Where was God in any of that? I don't know, Fletcher said honestly. I'm not a religious man, so I can't answer that. But maybe faith doesn't have to be in God. Maybe it can be in something else. In yourself. In the possibility that tomorrow might be better than today. In the kindness of strangers who pull you out of snowbanks and make sure you live to see another sunrise. Victoria felt tears welling up again. Why do you care? You don't know me. After tomorrow, you'll take me to Helena and we'll never see each other again. Why does it matter to you whether I have faith or not? Fletcher was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. Because I've been where you are. Maybe not exactly the same circumstances, but I've been in that place where everything is dark and cold and hopeless, where death seems easier than living. And I survived because one person showed me kindness when I needed it most. A ranch foreman named Bill Cutter took in a half-starved, angry 15-year-old kid and taught him how to be a man, gave him purpose when he had none. I owe him everything, and he died 3 years ago without me ever properly thanking him for saving my life. Victoria stared at him, seeing the pain in his eyes. "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry," Fletcher said. "Just understand that I know what it's like. And if I can do for you what Bill did for me, if I can give you even a fraction of the help he gave me, then maybe I can pay forward the debt I owe him. Maybe that's why I found you yesterday. Not God, not fate, just the universe giving me a chance to do something right." "That's faith," Victoria said quietly. "Maybe not in God, but in something bigger than yourself, in meaning and purpose. That's a kind of faith." Fletcher considered this. "Maybe you're right. I never thought of it that way." "Have faith in us," Victoria said, the words coming from somewhere deep inside her. "Not in God or the universe or anything cosmic, just in us, in people, in the capacity for kindness and connection, in the possibility that even when everything seems lost, someone might reach out a hand and pull you back." Fletcher's expression softened. "Have faith in us," he repeated. "I like that. That's something I can believe in." They held each other's gaze for a long moment, something shifting between them, some invisible boundary being crossed. Victoria felt it like a physical thing, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the fire. This man who'd saved her life, this rough cowboy with kind eyes and a patient way of speaking, he saw her. Really saw her, not as a burden or an obligation, but as a person worth saving, worth caring about. "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. For saving me, for listening to me, for caring enough to try to restore something I thought I'd lost forever." "You're welcome," Fletcher said. "Now finish your dinner before it gets cold. You need your strength for tomorrow's ride." They ate in companionable silence, but something had changed. The air between them felt charged with possibility, with the beginning of something neither of them could yet name but both could feel. That night, Victoria again took the bed while Fletcher bedded down near the fire. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the quiet sounds of his breathing, the crackle of burning wood, the whisper of wind outside. She thought about faith, about survival, about the strange turns life could take. Yesterday she'd been dying, lost in the cold, convinced her story was ending. Today she was warm and fed and alive, talking about philosophy with a cowboy who somehow understood her better after one day than most people had in years. She thought about the way Fletcher looked at her, steady and direct, with no judgment or pity. She thought about his hands, capable and kind. She thought about the possibility that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't as alone as she'd believed. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria felt a small spark of hope kindle in her chest. It was fragile, easily extinguished, but it was there. Real and present and impossibly precious. Have faith in us, she'd said. In people. In kindness. In connection. In Fletcher. The thought should have frightened her, but instead it felt like coming home. Morning brought clear skies and temperatures cold enough to burn exposed skin in minutes. Fletcher was up early, checking the horses he kept in the small shelter attached to the cabin, preparing for the journey to Helena. Victoria made breakfast from the remaining supplies, grateful to have a task to focus on rather than the confusing tangle of emotions in her chest. "Weather's good for travel," Fletcher announced when he came back inside, stamping snow from his boots. "Cold as sin, but clear. We should make good time if we leave within the hour." "I'm ready whenever you are," Victoria said, "though I'm afraid I'm not dressed for riding." I lost my cloak in the storm, and this dress isn't exactly practical. Fletcher assessed her traveling dress critically. I've got an extra coat you can wear. It'll be too big, but it's warm, and I can probably rig something to keep your skirts from tangling in the stirrups. You'll be riding with me, he added. I've only got 2 horses out here, and we need one as a pack animal to carry supplies back to the ranch. The thought of riding pressed against Fletcher for several hours made Victoria's heart beat faster, though she couldn't quite identify why. All right, she said. Thank you. They prepared efficiently, Fletcher moving with the practiced ease of someone who'd done this 100 times. He saddled a sturdy bay gelding, packed supplies on a smaller roan mare, and helped Victoria into his heavy wool coat. It swallowed her, the sleeves hanging past her fingertips, but it was blissfully warm and smelled of leather and wood smoke and something indefinably Fletcher. Ready? He asked, offering his hand to help her mount. Victoria took a breath, nodded, and let him help her onto the horse. He swung up behind her, his arm coming around her waist to hold the reins, his body warm and solid against her back. It was almost unbearably intimate, more physical contact than Victoria had experienced with any man in years, and she felt herself blushing despite the cold. Comfortable? Fletcher asked near her ear. Yes, Victoria managed, though comfortable wasn't quite the right word. Aware was more accurate, hyper-conscious of every point of contact, every shift of his body, every breath he took. They set off, Fletcher guiding the horse carefully through the deep snow. The landscape was breathtakingly beautiful, all pristine white punctuated by dark pines and the brilliant blue of a Montana winter sky. The sun was almost painfully bright, reflecting off the snow, and Victoria was grateful for the hat Fletcher had given her to shield her eyes. For the first hour they rode in silence, Fletcher concentrating on navigating the treacherous terrain, Victoria simply trying to process everything that had happened. 2 days ago, she'd been a woman with a plan, however modest. Travel to Helena, find her uncle, begin a new chapter. Then the storm had hit, and she'd lost not just her belongings but nearly her life. And now here she was, riding through a winter wonderland pressed against a man she'd known for less than 2 days, feeling things she had no right to feel. Tell me about Helena, she said eventually, needing to break the silence. It's a mining town, Fletcher said. Gold was discovered about 10 years ago and folks flooded in. Population's grown to maybe 3,000 people now. It's rough but not as lawless as some towns. They've got a proper sheriff, churches, schools, the usual establishments. Your uncle chose a good place to settle, assuming he's there. And if he's not? Victoria asked, voicing the fear she'd been suppressing. Then we'll figure out something else, Fletcher said calmly. One problem at a time, remember. Right now, we're just focused on getting you there safely. You make it sound simple, Victoria said. It is simple, Fletcher replied. Complicated, maybe, but simple. You need to get to Helena. I'm taking you there. Everything else is secondary. Victoria absorbed this, finding comfort in his straightforward logic. Can I ask you something? Of course. Yesterday you said you've been in the place I was. The dark place where living seems harder than dying. What pulled you out of it? Fletcher was quiet for so long that Victoria thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was thoughtful. Work, mostly. Bill, the foreman I mentioned, he gave me purpose, made me responsible for things, taught me that I mattered, that what I did had value. And slowly, over months and years, that belief took root. I started to see that maybe my father's death wasn't the end of my story, that maybe I could build something worth having, even if it wasn't what I'd originally planned. Do you ever think about what you would have done if he hadn't died? Victoria asked. What your life would have been? Sometimes, Fletcher admitted. I probably would have joined the cavalry like he wanted, fought in more Indian wars, maybe died in one, or maybe I'd have risen through the ranks, become an officer myself. It's hard to say. That life seems like a dream now, something that belonged to a different person. Do you regret it? Victoria asked. The life you didn't get to have? No, Fletcher said without hesitation. Regret is a waste of time. I can't change what happened, so why torture myself wondering about what might have been? This is the life I have, and I've made the best of it I can. That's all anyone can do. You're very wise, Victoria said softly. She felt rather than saw Fletcher's shrug. Not wise, just experienced. There's a difference. They rode on, the sun climbing higher, the cold slightly less brutal but still significant. Victoria found herself relaxing against Fletcher's chest, accepting the warmth and solidity of his presence. It felt natural, being this close to him. Safe in a way she hadn't felt safe in a very long time. Around midday, they stopped to rest the horses and eat a quick meal of jerky and hard biscuits. Fletcher helped Victoria down, and she stumbled slightly, her legs stiff from hours in the saddle. His hands steadied her, and for a moment they stood very close, breath fogging between them in the cold air. All right, he asked. Yes, Victoria said, just stiff. Walk around a bit, Fletcher advised. It'll help. We've got a few more hours to go. Victoria did as suggested, moving in small circles while Fletcher tended the horses. She watched him work, admiring the competence in every movement. He was a man completely at ease with his environment, confident in his skills. There was something deeply attractive about that confidence, Victoria realized. Not arrogance, but genuine capability. Fletcher, she said, the question forming before she could think better of it. Do you ever think about settling down? Having a family? He glanced at her, surprised. Sometimes. But my work doesn't lend itself to that kind of life. I'm alone for weeks at a time, living in line cabins or camps. That's no life for a wife or children. But is it the life you want? Victoria pressed. Fletcher paused in his work, really considering the question. I don't know, he admitted. It's the life I have. Whether it's the life I want, I've never really asked myself. What about you? What do you want? I thought I wanted stability, Victoria said. A home, maybe a family someday, work that mattered, but now I don't know. Everything I thought I wanted was tied to the boarding house, to Fort Benton. Without that anchor, I feel adrift. I don't know what I want anymore. Maybe that's not a bad thing, Fletcher suggested. Maybe being adrift means you're free to want something different. Something you haven't thought of yet. Or maybe it just means I'm lost, Victoria said. Lost and free can be the same thing, Fletcher said. He crossed to her, his expression serious. Victoria, I know you're scared. I know everything seems uncertain, but uncertainty also means possibility. You're not locked into any particular path right now. You get to choose what comes next. Within the constraints of being a woman with no money and no prospects, Victoria said with a bitter laugh. Those are just obstacles, Fletcher said. Not insurmountable ones. You're smart, capable, and strong. You survived things that would have broken other people. You'll figure it out. You have a lot of faith in me for someone you just met, Victoria observed. I do, Fletcher said simply. And maybe you should have a little faith in yourself too. They mounted up again and continued the journey. Victoria thought about Fletcher's words, turning them over in her mind. Faith in herself. When had she lost that? Somewhere in the years of caring for her father, of working herself to exhaustion, of watching everything she built crumble despite her best efforts, she'd stopped believing in her own capability. She'd started seeing herself as a victim of circumstance rather than an agent with power to shape her own destiny. But she'd survived, hadn't she? She'd lost everything and still kept going. She'd walked through a blizzard until her body gave out, and even then she'd been found. She'd been saved. And now she was riding toward a new beginning, Uncertain but possible. Maybe that was faith. Not in God or fate, but in the simple, stubborn persistence of the human spirit, the refusal to give up even when giving up would be easier. "Fletcher," she said softly. "Thank you for having faith in me, in us." She felt him shift behind her, his arm tightening slightly around her waist. "Always," he said, and the word felt like a promise. Helena appeared in the late afternoon, spread out in a valley between hills, smoke rising from countless chimneys into the clear winter air. It was bigger than Victoria had expected, a proper town with streets and buildings, not just a collection of tents and shacks. Relief and anxiety warred in her chest. They'd made it. Now came the hard part. Finding her uncle proved easier than Victoria had feared. Fletcher inquired at the general store, and the proprietor immediately recognized the name Thomas Shepard. "Sure, I know Tom," the man said. "Has a small ranch about 5 miles northwest of town. Raises sheep mostly. Good man, keeps to himself." Fletcher thanked him and they headed back to the horses. "Well, that's good news," he said. "He's here and established. That's half the battle. Will you take me there?" Victoria asked, then caught herself. "I'm sorry you've already done so much. I shouldn't presume, Victoria," Fletcher interrupted gently. "Of course I'll take you there. I told you I'd see this through, and I mean it." "Thank you," Victoria said, emotion clogging her throat. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "I don't want repayment," Fletcher said. "Just promise me you'll remember what we talked about faith, about believing things can get better." "I promise," Victoria said. "I won't forget." They rode northwest out of town, following the directions the store proprietor had provided. The sun was beginning to sink toward the horizon, painting the snow-covered landscape in shades of gold and pink. It was breathtakingly beautiful, and Victoria found herself wishing the ride could last longer. Soon they'd reach her uncle's ranch, Fletcher would leave, and this strange interlude would be over. She'd likely never see him again. The thought caused an unexpected pang in her chest. The Shepherd Ranch, when they found it, was modest but well-maintained. A sturdy log house with a barn and several outbuildings, fenced pastures where sheep huddled together against the cold. Smoke rose from the chimney, a sign of life and habitation. Fletcher helped Victoria down from the horse, and they stood together for a moment, neither quite ready to approach the house. "This is it," Victoria said unnecessarily. "Looks like a good place," Fletcher observed. "Your uncle's done well for himself." Fletcher, Victoria started, then stopped, unsure what she wanted to say. Thank you seemed inadequate. Goodbye seemed too final. Before she could find the words, the door to the house opened and a man emerged. He was in his 40s, tall and lean with dark hair graying at the temples and kind brown eyes. He looked curiously at them, his expression wary but not unfriendly. "Can I help you folks?" he called. "Mr. Shepard?" Victoria asked, her voice shaking slightly. "Thomas Shepard." "That's me," the man confirmed, stepping closer. "Who's asking?" "My name is Victoria Shepard," Victoria said. "I'm your brother William's daughter." Thomas's eyes widened in shock. "Victoria! Good Lord, child, I thought your letter said you'd arrive weeks ago. When you didn't show up, I assumed you'd changed your mind or something had happened." He crossed the distance between them quickly, looking her up and down with concern. "Are you all right? What happened?" "The stage broke down," Victoria explained. "I hired a horse but got caught in the blizzard 2 days ago. I would have died, but Fletcher found me and brought me to his line cabin. He's been taking care of me and he brought me here." Thomas turned his attention to Fletcher, his expression filled with gratitude. "Then I owe you a debt I can never repay, sir. Thank you for saving my niece." "No debt," Fletcher said, shaking the offered hand. "I'm just glad I was in the right place at the right time." Come inside, both of you, Thomas urged. It's too cold to stand out here talking. My wife will want to meet you, Victoria, and we have plenty of food and warm beds. They followed Thomas into the house, which was warm and comfortable, smelling of baking bread and wood smoke. A woman in her late 30s appeared from what must have been the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. She had a kind face and curious eyes. Emma, this is Victoria, William's daughter, Thomas said, and this is Fletcher, the man who saved her life. Emma's face lit with welcome. Oh, how wonderful! We'd been so worried when you didn't arrive. Come in, come in. You must be frozen and exhausted. She bustled around them, taking coats, offering chairs near the fire, chattering in a warm, motherly way that made Victoria's chest tighten with emotion. As Emma disappeared into the kitchen to prepare food, Thomas settled into a chair across from Fletcher and Victoria. "Tell me everything," he said. "Your letter was brief. I know about William's passing, but not much else." Victoria told him, explaining about the boarding house, her father's drinking, the debts, and her decision to accept Thomas's offer of help. Fletcher sat quietly beside her, his presence a comfort as she recounted the difficult story. "I'm so sorry, child," Thomas said when she finished, his eyes damp. "William was my younger brother, and we weren't as close as we should have been. I should have reached out sooner, should have offered help when your mother died. I failed you and failed him." "You didn't know," Victoria said gently, "and you're helping now, that's what matters." "Indeed," Thomas said. "Your family, Victoria, you have a home here for as long as you need it. We have 2 children, both young, and Emma could certainly use help around the house. You're welcome to stay." Relief flooded through Victoria. "Thank you. I promise I'll work hard. I won't be a burden." "Family is never a burden," Thomas said firmly. He turned to Fletcher. "And you, sir, you must stay for dinner at least. Let us show proper hospitality." Fletcher glanced at Victoria, something complicated in his expression. "I should be getting back to the ranch." "Nonsense," Emma said, emerging from the kitchen with a tray of coffee cups. "It's nearly dark and you must be exhausted. Stay the night at least. We have room, and it's the least we can do after you saved our niece." Fletcher hesitated, and Victoria found herself hoping he'd agree. She wasn't ready to say goodbye yet, not when there was so much unspoken between them. "Please," she said softly. "Stay." Fletcher's eyes met hers and something passed between them, a recognition of the connection they'd formed over the past 2 days. "All right," he said. "Thank you for the hospitality." Dinner was a lively affair. Thomas and Emma's children, a boy of 8 and a girl of 6, were curious and energetic, full of questions about Victoria and Fletcher. Emma served a hearty meal of roasted meat, potatoes, and vegetables, with fresh bread and butter. It was more food than Victoria had seen in months, and she ate gratefully. As the evening wore on, Victoria watched Fletcher interact with the family. He was good with the children, patient with their questions, respectful to Thomas and Emma. He fit into the domestic scene easily, and Victoria caught herself imagining what it might be like if this were their home, their family, their life together. The thought startled her with its intensity. She'd known Fletcher for 2 days. 2 days. It was absurd to be thinking such things. And yet, she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him, the sense that he understood her in ways no one else had. The feeling that losing him would be losing something precious before she'd fully recognized its value. After dinner, while Emma put the children to bed and Thomas tended to evening chores, Victoria and Fletcher found themselves alone by the fire. "Your uncle seems like a good man," Fletcher said. "You'll be well cared for here." "Yes," Victoria agreed. "They're very kind." She paused, gathering courage. "Fletcher, I know you need to get back to your work, but will I see you again?" Fletcher was quiet for a moment. "I don't know," he said honestly. "The Circle T is about 30 miles from here." I come into Helena for supplies every few weeks, but I don't know if I'd have reason to come out this way." "Oh," Victoria said, unable to keep the disappointment from her voice. "Of course. You have your own life, your work." "Victoria," Fletcher said, turning to face her fully. "These past 2 days, they've been unexpected, special. You're not like anyone I've met before. You're strong and honest, and you've made me think about things I haven't thought about in years." "But," Victoria prompted, hearing the unspoken word. "But I don't know what that means," Fletcher admitted. "I don't know how to do this. I've been alone so long, I don't know if I even know how to be with someone, and you're just starting to rebuild your life. The last thing you need is complications." "Maybe you're not a complication," Victoria said softly. "Maybe you're a possibility." Fletcher's expression was pained. "I want to believe that, I do. But I'm a cowboy who lives in line cabins for months at a time. You deserve better than that. You deserve stability and security and a proper home." "Shouldn't I get to decide what I deserve?" Victoria asked. "Fletcher, I'm not asking you for promises or commitments. I'm just asking if there's a chance, if maybe we could see where this goes." "I don't want to hurt you," Fletcher said. "Then don't disappear," Victoria replied. "Don't just ride away and pretend these 2 days didn't happen. We said to have faith in us, in people, in connection. Have faith in this, in the possibility that maybe we found each other for a reason." Fletcher reached out, his rough hand cupping her cheek gently. "You're making this very hard." "Good," Victoria said, leaning into his touch. "It should be hard. Things worth having usually are." "When did you get so wise?" Fletcher asked, a small smile playing at his lips. "I learned from a cowboy I met in a blizzard," Victoria said. "He taught me about faith and holding on and believing in possibilities." Fletcher's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, the touch sending shivers through her that had nothing to do with cold. "I'll come back," he said. "I can't promise when, but I'll come back. We'll figure this out. Together." "Together," Victoria echoed, relief flooding through her. "That's all I'm asking for." Fletcher leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted. Victoria didn't want. She closed the remaining distance between them, and their lips met in a kiss that was gentle and sweet and full of promise. It was a first kiss, but also a vow, a commitment to try to believe, to have faith in the connection forming between them. When they pulled apart, both were slightly breathless. Fletcher rested his forehead against hers. "I meant what I said. I'll come back." "I believe you," Victoria said, and realized it was true. She did believe him. Fletcher was a man of his word, solid and trustworthy in ways she'd rarely encountered. If he said he'd return, he would. They sat together by the fire until Thomas returned, talking quietly about small things and large plans and possibilities, the strange turns life could take. When Emma showed Fletcher to the small guest room and Victoria to another room that would be hers, they exchanged one last long look, a silent promise passing between them. Victoria lay in bed that night in a proper room with clean sheets and a warm quilt, staring at the ceiling. 2 days ago, she'd been dying in the snow, convinced her story was over. Now she was safe in her uncle's home, with work and purpose ahead of her, and the promise of something more with a cowboy who'd pulled her back from the edge in more ways than one. She'd lost her faith in the cold, but Fletcher had restored it. Not faith in God necessarily, but faith in something perhaps more important. Faith in human connection, in kindness, in the possibility of love and second chances. "Have faith in us," she'd said. And now, incredibly, she did. Fletcher left early the next morning, needing to return to the Circle T and report to his employer. Victoria walked him to his horse, neither quite ready for the goodbye. "How long until you come back?" she asked. "A few weeks, probably," Fletcher said. "I have to finish checking the winter range, file my reports, but I'll come as soon as I can, I promise." "I'll be here," Victoria said, "learning to be a shepherd's assistant and getting to know my cousins and trying to figure out what comes next." "You'll be fine," Fletcher said with confidence. "Better than fine. You're going to thrive here." "Because I have faith," Victoria said with a small smile. "Because you have faith," Fletcher agreed. He pulled her into a brief but tight embrace. "I'll see you soon." "Soon," Victoria echoed, watching as he mounted his horse and rode away, leading the pack horse behind him. She stood in the cold morning air until he disappeared from sight, her hand pressed against her chest where her heart beat strong and steady. She had lost so much. Her parents, her home, nearly her life. But she'd also found something unexpected. Hope, purpose, the beginning of love, and that, Victoria thought as she turned back to the house where her uncle's family waited, was worth having faith in. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. Victoria threw herself into helping Emma with the household and children. She cooked and cleaned and mended, tasks familiar from her boarding house days but different in this context. This was family, not business. The work felt meaningful in a way it hadn't before. Thomas was patient and kind, sharing stories about her father as a young man, before the drink took him. Victoria learned about a William she'd never known, full of laughter and dreams, and she treasured these glimpses of who her father had been. The children, Luke and Sarah, initially shy, quickly warmed to their new cousin. Victoria told them stories and played games and helped with their lessons. Emma watched with approval, clearly relieved to have help with the energetic pair. But through all of it, Victoria thought of Fletcher. She wondered where he was, what he was doing, if he thought of her as often as she thought of him. She replayed their conversations in her mind, remembered the feel of his arms around her on the horse, the gentleness of his kiss. 3 weeks after he'd left, on a clear February morning, Victoria was hanging laundry when she heard a horse approaching. She looked up, her heart leaping, and saw Fletcher riding up the path to the house. She dropped the shirt she'd been hanging and ran to meet him, propriety forgotten. He dismounted quickly and caught her as she reached him, lifting her off her feet in a tight embrace. "You came back," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. "I promised I would," Fletcher said, setting her down but not releasing her. "Did you doubt me?" "No," Victoria said truthfully. "But I'm so glad you're here." Fletcher's smile was like sunrise. "I finished my work early. Told Mr. Thornton I needed some personal time. He's a good man, didn't ask questions." "How long can you stay?" Victoria asked. "A few days," Fletcher said, "if your uncle doesn't mind." "He won't mind," Victoria assured him. "Come inside. Everyone will be happy to see you." Thomas and Emma were indeed pleased by Fletcher's return, welcoming him warmly. Over the next few days, Fletcher became part of the household, helping Thomas with ranch work, playing with the children, and spending every possible moment with Victoria. They took walks despite the cold, talking for hours about everything and nothing. Fletcher told her about his work, the cattle he tended, the wild beauty of the high country. Victoria shared her dreams, small and large, the life she was building with her uncle's family. On Fletcher's last evening before he had to return to the Circle T, they sat together on the porch despite the cold, wrapped in blankets and watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. "I don't want you to go," Victoria admitted. "I don't want to go either," Fletcher said. "But I have responsibilities, cattle that need tending, work that needs doing." "I know," Victoria said. "I'm not trying to make you choose between me and your work." "I know you're not," Fletcher said. He took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "Victoria, these past few weeks, you've been on my mind constantly. I found myself rushing through work, counting the days until I could come back. I've never felt this way about anyone." "I feel the same," Victoria said softly. It's fast, I know, maybe too fast, but I can't deny it. Neither can I, Fletcher said. He turned to face her fully. I want to court you properly, with your uncle's permission and everything done right. I know I'm not much, just a cowboy with modest means, but I'm hardworking and honest and I care about you deeply. Victoria felt tears prickling her eyes, but they were happy tears. I would be honored to be courted by you. Even though it means seeing each other only every few weeks, Fletcher asked. Even though I can't offer you fancy things or an easy life. I don't want fancy things, Victoria said. I want honesty and kindness and someone who sees me for who I really am. You've given me all of that. The rest we can figure out together. Fletcher pulled her close, kissing her with a passion tempered by tenderness. Together, he murmured against her lips. I like the sound of that. The next morning, before Fletcher left, he spoke formally to Thomas, asking permission to court Victoria. Thomas gave his blessing readily, clearly approving of the steady young cowboy who'd saved his niece's life. You're a good man, Fletcher, Thomas said, shaking his hand. Take care of her heart. With my life, Fletcher promised. And so began a courtship conducted largely through letters and infrequent visits. Fletcher would ride out from the Circle T every few weeks, spending whatever time he could spare with Victoria before returning to his duties. Between visits, they wrote long letters, sharing their thoughts and experiences, learning each other through words on paper. Winter gave way to spring, and spring to summer. Victoria bloomed in the warmth of family and Fletcher's growing affection. She learned to tend sheep alongside Thomas, discovered a talent for gardening that kept Emma's kitchen stocked with vegetables, and became an indispensable part of the household. Fletcher's visits became the highlights of her life. Each time he arrived, her heart leaped. Each time he left, she counted the days until his return. But the separations, rather than weakening their bond, seemed to strengthen it. They learned patience and trust, the ability to maintain connection across distance. In August, 6 months after they'd met, Fletcher arrived for a visit with a determined look on his face. After dinner, he asked Thomas if he could speak with Victoria privately. Thomas agreed with a knowing smile. They walked to the meadow behind the house, the summer evening warm and golden. Fletcher took Victoria's hands in his expression serious but his eyes full of love. Victoria, I've been thinking about this for months, he began. About us, about the future, about what I want my life to be. And the answer is simple. I want it to be with you. Victoria's breath caught. Fletcher, let me finish, he said gently. I know I'm just a cowboy. I don't have much to offer except hard work and honest affection. But I've spoken to Mr. Thornton, and he's agreed to give me a different position. I'll be working out of the main ranch instead of the line cabins, with regular hours and better pay. It means I can build us a home, Victoria. A real home, here near your uncle's ranch. We can be close to your family while building our own. Tears streamed down Victoria's face. Are you asking what I think you're asking? Fletcher reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. Victoria Shepherd, will you marry me? Will you build a life with me, have faith in us, in this love we've found? Yes, Victoria said without hesitation. Yes, 1,000 times yes. Fletcher slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly. He pulled her into his arms, kissing her deeply while the summer sun painted the sky in shades of orange and pink. I love you, he said against her hair. I've loved you since you asked me to have faith in us. I love you too, Victoria replied. You saved my life in more ways than one. They were married in September in a simple ceremony at the small church in Helena. Emma helped Victoria sew a dress of pale blue cotton, and Thomas gave her away with tears in his eyes. Fletcher stood at the altar in his best clothes, his eyes never leaving Victoria's face as she walked toward him. They exchanged vows in steady voices, promising to love and honor through all the seasons of life. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Fletcher kissed his bride with joy and tenderness, and the small gathering of friends and family applauded. The house Fletcher had been building was finished by October, a sturdy cabin on land he'd purchased just 2 miles from Thomas's ranch. It was small but well built, with a bedroom, a main room, and a kitchen that made Victoria gasp with delight. Fletcher had thought of everything, from the large fireplace to the shelves for her books to the window that looked out over the mountains. "Welcome home, Mrs. Shepherd," he said, carrying her over the threshold. "It's perfect," Victoria whispered, looking around at the home they'd build their life in. "It's absolutely perfect." Their first year of marriage was everything Victoria had dreamed of and more. Fletcher worked at the Circle T, coming home each evening to a warm house and a loving wife. Victoria tended their small garden, learned to keep chickens, and helped Emma with the children when needed. In the evenings, they'd sit by the fire, Fletcher reading aloud while Victoria sewed or simply listening to his voice. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the small intimacies of shared life. Fletcher learned that Victoria sang while she cooked and had a terrible sense of direction. Victoria learned that Fletcher talked to horses and had a secret talent for whittling. They discovered they both loved thunderstorms and hated early mornings, that they could argue passionately about small things but always made up before bed. In the spring of 1875, Victoria discovered she was pregnant. She told Fletcher over dinner, simply placing his hand on her still flat stomach and watching his face transform with wonder and joy. "A baby," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "We're having a baby." "We're having a baby," Victoria confirmed, laughing as he whooped and spun her around the kitchen. "Careful," she protested. "You'll make me dizzy." "I'll be careful with you both," Fletcher promised, setting her down gently. "I'll take care of you, Victoria, both of you, I promise." He kept that promise through the months that followed, attentive to Victoria's needs, excited about every change and milestone. He built a cradle with his own hands, sanding it smooth and painting it carefully. Emma helped Victoria prepare clothes and blankets, sharing wisdom from her own pregnancies. In November, on a cold night with snow falling softly outside, Victoria went into labor. Emma attended her, with Fletcher pacing anxiously in the main room until Emma finally called him in. "Come meet your son," she said, smiling. Fletcher entered the bedroom to find Victoria propped up in bed, exhausted but radiant, holding a tiny bundle. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at the red-faced infant who was their child. "A son," he whispered. "We have a son." "We have a son," Victoria agreed, tears streaming down her face. "What should we name him?" Fletcher thought for a moment. "William," he said, "after your father, and Thomas as a middle name for your uncle, William Thomas Shepherd." "It's perfect," Victoria said, watching as Fletcher carefully took the baby from her, cradling his son with wonder written across his face. "Hello, William," Fletcher said softly. "I'm your father, and I promise you I'm going to be the best father I know how to be. I'm going to teach you right from wrong, how to work hard, how to treat people with kindness. And most importantly, I'm going to teach you about faith. Not necessarily in God, though your mother and I will leave that for you to decide, but faith in people, in love, in the possibility that even when things seem darkest, there's always light to be found if you're willing to look for it." Victoria watched her husband with their newborn son, her heart so full she thought it might burst. She thought about the woman she'd been almost 2 years ago, lost and freezing in a blizzard, convinced her story was ending. She'd lost her faith in the cold, lost hope, lost the will to keep fighting. But Fletcher had found her. He'd saved her life and then given her a reason to live it. He'd restored her faith, not in divine intervention, but in something perhaps more powerful, the human capacity for love and connection and grace. "Have faith in us," she whispered, remembering those words spoken in a line cabin while a storm raged outside. Fletcher looked up, understanding in his eyes. "Always," he said, "always faith in us." As the years passed, that faith proved well-founded. William was joined by 2 more children, a daughter named Emma for her beloved aunt, and another son named Fletcher Jr. The cabin was expanded to accommodate the growing family, and Fletcher advanced in his work until he became foreman of the Circle T, respected and valued. Victoria helped establish a school in the growing community, using her education to teach the children of ranchers and miners. She maintained close relationships with Thomas and Emma, with their children who grew alongside her own. She wrote letters to old friends from Fort Benton, rebuilding connections she'd thought lost forever. Fletcher proved to be the father he'd promised to be, patient and loving, teaching his children about honor and hard work and the importance of helping others. He never forgot the lesson Bill Cutter had taught him about reaching out a hand to those who needed it, and he instilled that value in his children. On cold winter nights, when storms rattled the windows and snow piled high outside, Victoria would sometimes remember that January day in 1873 when she'd collapsed in the snow, ready to die. It seemed like a lifetime ago, like something that had happened to a different person. In a way, it had. That frightened, faithless woman had died in the cold. She'd been reborn in the warmth of Fletcher's care, in the love they'd built together, in the family they'd created. She'd thought the cold had taken everything from her. Instead, it had brought her to exactly where she needed to be. On their 25th wedding anniversary, in 1898, Victoria and Fletcher sat on the porch of their home, now grown to a substantial house with additions built over the years. Their children were grown, William working alongside his father at the Circle T, Emma teaching at the school her mother had helped establish, and Fletcher Jr. learning blacksmithing in Helena. Grandchildren played in the yard, their laughter carrying on the summer breeze. "Can you believe it's been 25 years?" Victoria asked, her hand in Fletcher's as it had been countless times before. "Sometimes it feels like yesterday," Fletcher replied. "Other times it feels like we've always been together." "I was just thinking about the day we met," Victoria said. "How close I came to dying, how different everything would be if you hadn't found me." "But I did find you," Fletcher said, "and you found me in a way. We found each other." "Have faith in us," Victoria quoted, smiling at the memory. "Do you remember when I said that?" "I remember everything about those days," Fletcher said. "How you looked wrapped in all my blankets, how you cried when the feeling came back to your hands, how you asked me if I believed in God and I didn't know how to answer." "You gave me a better answer than any preacher could have," Victoria said. "You taught me that faith isn't about believing in the invisible. It's about believing in what's right in front of you, in the connections we make, the love we share, the life we build together." "We built a good life," Fletcher said, looking out at their grandchildren, their home, the land they'd tended for decades. "Better than I ever imagined possible." "Because we had faith," Victoria said. "In us, in love, in the possibility that 2 broken people could make each other whole." Fletcher raised her hand to his lips, kissing her knuckles gently. "I love you, Victoria Shepherd. I've loved you from the moment you asked me to believe in us, and I'll love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Victoria replied. "My savior, my partner, my heart. Thank you for finding me in the cold. Thank you for bringing me back to life. Thank you for teaching me about faith." They sat together as the sun set, painting the Montana sky in brilliant colors, surrounded by the life they'd built through love and work and unwavering faith in each other. Victoria thought of all the things that could have gone differently, all the ways her story could have ended in tragedy instead of triumph. But this was how it was meant to be. She was certain of that now. The cold had taken her to the brink of death, stripped away everything she thought she knew, forced her to confront the emptiness inside her where faith had once lived, and Fletcher had restored it. Not with preaching or platitudes, but with simple human decency. With kindness when she needed it most, with steady presence and honest affection, with a willingness to believe that two people, damaged and lost, could find their way together. Have faith in us. Those words had changed everything. They'd been a lifeline when Victoria was drowning, a light when all was darkness, a promise that she wasn't alone. And 25 years later, sitting on the porch with her husband's hand in hers and their grandchildren playing in the yard, Victoria could say with absolute certainty that she'd kept the faith. In them, in love, in the remarkable resilience of the human heart. She'd lost her faith in the cold, but the cowboy had restored it, and in doing so, he'd given her everything she'd ever needed: a home, a family, a purpose, a love that would last until the end of time, and that, Victoria knew, was worth more than all the gold in Montana. As darkness fell, and the stars emerged one by one in the vast Montana sky, Victoria and Fletcher remained on the porch, reluctant to end this perfect day. The grandchildren had been called inside by their parents, the evening sounds of crickets and distant cattle replacing childish laughter. "Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if we'd never met?" Victoria asked, her head resting on Fletcher's shoulder. "Sometimes," Fletcher admitted. "I'd probably still be living in line cabins, alone except for my horse and the occasional cow. Growing old without anyone to share it with. It sounds like a lonely way to live when I say it out loud." "You saved me," Victoria said softly. "But I think maybe I saved you too, from that loneliness, from a life half lived." Fletcher kissed the top of her head. "We saved each other." That's how the best partnerships work. It's not about one person rescuing the other. It's about two people choosing each other every day through good times and hard times alike. And we've had both, Victoria reflected. The years had brought challenges alongside joys. Difficult winters, sick children, financial struggles, losses. But they'd faced everything together, their faith in each other never wavering. "We have," Fletcher agreed. "And we'll face whatever comes next the same way, together." Victoria smiled in the darkness. "Always together." As they finally rose to go inside, Victoria took one last look at the star-filled sky, at the land that had become their home, at the house that held their history. She thought of the frightened young woman who'd stumbled through a blizzard, faithless and alone, certain she was going to die. She wished she could go back and tell that woman that everything would be all right, that loss and pain weren't the end of the story, that the coldest night could lead to the warmest dawn. But that woman no longer existed. She'd been transformed by love and time and faith into someone stronger, someone happier, someone whole. Inside their home, Fletcher banked the fire while Victoria checked that all the windows were secured. They moved through the familiar evening routine, comfortable in the patterns built over 25 years of marriage. In their bedroom, they prepared for bed with the easy intimacy of long partnership. As they lay together in the darkness, Fletcher's arm around Victoria, both on the edge of sleep, Victoria whispered, "Thank you." "For what?" Fletcher murmured, already half asleep. "For everything. For finding me, for loving me, for building this life with me. For having faith in us when I had none." Fletcher pulled her closer. "Best decision I ever made, stopping to investigate what I thought was a fallen deer in the snow, turned out to be the greatest treasure of my life. I love you, Victoria said. I love you too, Fletcher replied. Now go to sleep. Tomorrow we're taking the grandchildren fishing, remember? Victoria smiled in the darkness, warmth spreading through her chest. Tomorrow they'd make new memories with their grandchildren, continuing the cycle of love and family they'd started 25 years ago. There would be laughter and sticky fingers and probably someone falling in the creek. It would be chaotic and exhausting and absolutely perfect, just like the life they'd built together. As sleep claimed her, Victoria's last thought was a prayer of gratitude, not directed at any particular deity but sent out into the universe nonetheless. Thank you for the cold that brought me to the edge. Thank you for the cowboy who pulled me back. Thank you for teaching me that faith isn't about believing in things unseen, but about trusting in the love that's right in front of you. She'd lost her faith in the cold, but Fletcher had restored it with 3 simple words: have faith in us. And she had. Every day for 25 years, she'd had faith in them, in their love, in their partnership, in their ability to weather any storm together. That faith had been rewarded 1,000-fold. With children and grandchildren, with a home and a community, with a love that had only deepened with time. With a life rich in meaning and connection and joy, the cold had tried to take everything from her. Instead, it had led her to everything she'd ever needed, and that was the greatest gift of all. The knowledge that even in our darkest moments, even when we're lost and faithless and ready to give up, salvation can come from the most unexpected places. From a cowboy riding through a blizzard, from a stranger who becomes a savior and then a partner. From the simple human willingness to help someone in need, to reach out a hand and say, I've got you. You're not alone. Victoria had been alone in the cold, but she'd never been alone again after Fletcher found her, and she never would be as long as they both drew breath. That was the power of faith. Not faith in the abstract, but faith in the concrete reality of love and commitment and choosing each other every single day. Have faith in us. She'd said those words in desperation, in hope, in a fragile moment of possibility. And they'd become the foundation of everything that followed, the bedrock on which she and Fletcher had built their lives. As she drifted into peaceful sleep, secure in Fletcher's arms, Victoria smiled. Tomorrow would bring new joys and new challenges. But whatever came, they'd face it together. Always together, always faith in us. And that was all they needed, the end.